Hello, and welcome back to the next episode of In Plain Sight. I'm Jeremy from the GTM team here at Viso. Thank you all for joining us today. This session is a masterclass for operations leaders and all about how computer vision or AI vision is a total game changer for industry. How AI vision improves flow and safety, and also visibility across the supply chain, especially in manufacturing, logistics, and operations environments where complexity tends to build quickly across multiple handoffs. A lot of people still think about this, understandably, in fairly narrow terms. So that's one camera, one task, one checkpoint. But the bigger opportunity is much, much broader than that. Today, we're looking at how AI vision can create visibility across the full movement of goods, from inbound logistics and yard activity through warehouse flow, production handoffs, and outbound dispatch. And that matters because some of the biggest losses do not begin in just one obvious place. They actually start where teams, materials, vehicles, and processes intersect, and where delays, safety risks, inefficiencies, and service failures begin to build before anyone has the full picture. So today's discussion is about how organizations move beyond fragmented signals and start connecting those points into one unified operational view. We'll bring that to life with practical examples, look at where the strongest ROI tends to appear, and talk about why platform thinking matters when different teams and workflows need to work from one picture rather than several disconnected or fragmented ones. So, a very warm welcome, Sasha, to In Plain Sight. It is great to have you here.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's brilliant to be here. I love the studio.
Great to have you. Sasha is one of our solutions engineers, working with clients on early stage deployments and simplifying this technology into something that's actionable and full of insights that make sense. So before we dive into the detail, could you set the scene for us a bit? Why does this matter now? Why is the narrow view of computer vision too limiting? And the killer question, where do the biggest operational losses actually tend to show up in practice in the real world?
Those are really great questions. I think to start off, I would go with the perception that computer vision is brand new is still very much out there, but in reality, it isn't. Viso AI has been around for almost 10 years, and that just gives you an idea. But when we first discover a technology, whatever it may be, the instinct is just to dip our toe in. And where we end up is going with point solutions. And what that is essentially what you mentioned in your introduction: one camera, one problem, monitoring it, trying to understand how it works best, right? But what that does is just limit us very much in the future. So what I want to talk about today is just the importance of really going with a solution that can link your chain from one end to the other. So really allow you to get that full benefit of consistent data, of end-to-end insights. So what that really allows you to do is to get your end-to-end insights. And that means consistent data, something that can become very actionable, something that can be analyzed. You can then implement actions on top of that and really see what impact your actions are having. So it becomes more of an operations intelligence as opposed to just, is this tiny little piece working or not?
That's such an important starting point. Thank you. What I've heard there and what I've heard you describing often on calls with engagements and clients is that the biggest issues often sit in the gaps between functions. So that might be at the dock, it could be in the yard, around warehouse buffers, during loading and unloading, and even at those handoff points between logistics and production. For me, that's also where visibility can be weakest. So instead of only reacting once something's already gone wrong, the opportunity is to see where flow is starting to break down earlier before the effect spreads further across the operation. Right, into the best place to start. If you had to strip this back to one key idea for the audience, what would it be? I like to ask 2 or 3 questions at the same time. So I'd also ask, what's the big thing organizations are still missing? And what should they be asking themselves instead?
I think, gosh, that's a lot of questions. Let's start at the beginning. So I already mentioned point solution, disjoint solution, and I think that's is going to be the key here for this conversation. We're talking about supply chain where nothing really is in isolation, even though sometimes, to your point, it can feel that way. One person's in charge for one link, the other for the other. So it can be natural to just think about your own little area, but in reality, that does not give the biggest impact to the businesses. So a disjoint solution could look like quality inspection or just safety, but in reality, that gives you very little through and through insight. Just gives you that little tiny bit, that problem that you're looking to solve right away. I have notes because I know I can go off on a little run around, so I will refer to them. Apologies.
We love your tangents, Sasha. Just go for it.
Well, I don't know. If we're here for 2 hours, you guys may disagree. So with end-to-end solutions, what you're really doing is breaking down those silos, really finding that cause and effect. So if we're looking to compare the two, an example of a point solution could be pointing a camera at those buffer zones that you've mentioned and just seeing, oh, hey, there's material missing, one and done, right? Whether end-to-end solution would look like this. We are reaching the point of production where we need this material. Sending a notification, material must be in this area in the next 10 minutes. Then we can say, material is still not there. It's missing at the time that it should be there. Then the next point is, if production falls behind because of this, you can say, yes, production fell behind, but the material wasn't there in place. Then if the loading falls behind, there's that incremental effect that then no one who doesn't deserve the blame, or rather not the blame, but where you have those inefficiency gaps and you can say, well, maybe the loading wasn't done fast enough, or we didn't track the truck well enough to say that it's time to load. But in reality, the cause was the material wasn't there on time. The reason for that could be various, but we know that that was the initial point of the breakdown. And that's where the end-to-end solution really gives you that full-on intelligence. It's not just looking at one thing and saying, yeah, there's a problem here, because you could identify the problem as loading wasn't done fast enough. But in reality, the cause could have been at that material buffer not being in place on time. So that's the area that you'll have to concentrate on, giving you really that full operational intelligence, as opposed to maybe spending time and money optimizing something that already works.
I love that. Full operational intelligence. That is such a helpful reframe. The real opportunity isn't just visibility at one isolated point. That rings loud and clear through what you're saying. It's visibility across the whole chain of movement, right? From supplier through yard, warehouse, production, dispatch. And I think the essential thing for me is once you look at it that way, the conversation actually changes. It becomes less about what model should we deploy and much more about where are we lacking visibility, which decisions would improve if we could actually see what's happening, and where's that operational capability building. Right, let's move on. And as I love to do, let's make this a bit more practical and dial up what happens in real deployments. You're expertly positioned on this. When you look across the value chain, where do you tend to see ROI show up first? By that, I mean, which areas usually make the strongest business case, and where do teams often find value faster than they expected?
That's a great question. And the answer is the one that we all love. There is no one answer, right? So it very much depends on the organization, on the operational processes and flows. Everyone falls between the cracks. So I think actually most people on this call will have an idea where that area lies for them. So whether that's through data of decreased output or some missed targets, missed SLAs, but also some may just have that gut feel. So bottlenecks that keep coming up in conversations, specific areas that just get blamed by all sorts of other areas and people and management. So I think it's important to know or to try and figure out where you think those key lynch points are. Um, and you can go small. You can start with one location, with one use case, or maybe multiple locations, one use case. It's really, your organization best. There are some examples that I can certainly give that tend to be the most impactful. And it's something that you mentioned before. It tends to be the in between of the areas. So whether that's loading, the truck yard. So when the truck's coming in, knowing when they're coming in, which bay they're in, what needs to be loaded there, or buffer zones. So when one material needs to be delivered either for production or to be stored in warehouse, etc. So as an example, we had one specific company that I can think of. They had a number of buffer zones. And so just addressing those sticking points, they managed to cut 20 or 30% inefficiencies within their material flow. Now, that's not going to change the world. That's not going to, increase your throughput to 200% and increase your sales and revenues. But what that does is give you that starting point, that proof of value that technology works, that you can do something with it, that delivers value. And then what really, really makes that huge difference is building on top of it. So you're not just stopping at one, saying, yay, we got our 20, 30% increase in this specific area, that's enough. But it's building up that chain of use cases and really expanding your value that has that biggest impact.
Love that. Spotting the weaker links in the supply chain and then layering on to build up that value. What I think people might also take from this is that the return looks a little different in each area, but the pattern is actually consistent. So better visibility improves flow, response time, and control, as you said. And also picking up on what you said about it could be in inbound logistics, yard operations, the warehouse buffers example you gave, or outbound dispatch. That value becomes tangible when those issues start translating into the measurable gains you referred to. And those could be in throughput, reliability, safety, and cost. So I'd love to ground this with a few more specific examples. Just a two-part question this time. Which sectors show this especially well? And what would you say those examples reveal about where the broader value really sits?
Great questions again. Really get my cogs turning. Again, the number of industries that this has an impact is as long as a piece of string, right? You have an industry, chances are there is opportunity there. Where we're seeing a lot of traction at the moment, I'm going to list off the industries first and then give you some examples. So food and beverage industries, seeing a lot of improvements that can be done there. Then discrete, like automotive, manufacturing, and lastly, of course, warehouse and logistics are always at the top of that. So when it comes to food and beverage, I think hygiene is top most problem, right? Because you have a lot of goods that can spoil quickly. So you can't have things sitting out for too long. Everything has very strict time limit of how quickly it must be used up as soon as it's in a certain area. You have certain processes that must be followed step by step. So even things like washing your hands, we've actually had use cases of cameras on the washing station to make sure that everyone follows that procedure and it takes the correct amount of time. A big one with food and beverage right now that we're seeing as well is a lot of machinery that they have to produce these goods are not digitized. And what I mean by that is when something goes wrong, and we've had very specific examples of whether machine just not outputting what it should do or producing outputs with a lot of waste, and it doesn't get found out until this production reaches normally the packing stage. And between where the issue happened to the packing stage, you could have lost an hour or longer in your production. And also, sometimes you're also wasting a lot of that raw material because what comes out is not what's fit for sale or for the next point in the cycle. So, actually, pointing a camera at these production lines that just tells you, okay, everything's still going um, in the correct flow, the correct amount of. I don't want to give specific examples to give away the customers. So it's a little harder for me to explain. What you have is essentially just tracking the throughput, tracking that what comes out is what's meant to come out and what it's meant to look like. So you're not having to have people in each one of those areas because often they are very much automated, but it still gives you those signals. When something needs fixing, you find out immediately, and not only when someone just happens to be looking or by the time it does reach the people, which tends to be in a packing area. So that's for food and beverage. Lots of examples and really insights there. Then you have the automotive and discrete manufacturing. So that would be a lot of man hours. So making sure, again, that the processes are followed as they should be. The big one tends to be, is the workstation ready for a certain process? So are the tools where they need to be? Are the materials there in place to make sure that that worker put something together in the most efficient way possible. You also have time and motion studies. So all of those can also be done with computer vision. And those are just some examples. And lastly, the warehouse and logistics. So we already spoke about the dockyards, the loading. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Just maybe one more that I didn't really mention in terms of those is we also have customers who, when the trucks come, they are then essentially starting a stopwatch of to an effect. And if the truck is there for longer than a certain period of time, then this company will incur a fine because they didn't complete the turnaround in time. The other part with that happens is the disputes. Were they really there for 2 hours or did they not count it right? With computer vision, again, you take away that ambiguity, but what also you're able to do is to really give those signals to your workers of, hey, this truck is coming up to its time limit, but you can still turn it around. If maybe you could put a little bit more manpower because the one you're working on right now can still stay there for another hour, whether this one needs to go out right now. And with logistics, the other one as well is your fleet management. So whether that's cameras on, say, your machinery, your forklifts, your trucks, making sure that the zone around them is safe, so there are no people coming too close, what have you. But also sometimes what we've had customers do is actually place cameras inside the vehicles to make sure that the driver is concentrating on the task of driving. There have been some issues with people being distracted on phones and such, and that the drivers are aware, not sleepy. And yeah, so those are some of the things that can really be top of mind and some of the top ones that I would say take the pudding.
That was fantastic, Sasha. I think what always comes across is we always get more than we bargained for with you. Asked for a couple of examples, and you've given us a really comprehensive and colorful picture that really brings that to life vividly. And what I like about those examples is that they show the same pattern in very, very different settings. Food and beverage, automotive, warehousing and logistics, they've all got different operational pressures, but the same visibility problem keeps appearing. And in each case, and I know you're super passionate about this, computer vision is doing more than spotting just one single
Mm.
issue. It's helping people respond faster, it's helping them coordinate better. And I would say it's managing that flow across multiple parts of the operation rather than just that one single point. So, Sasha, just thinking about our audience mindset, if someone's tuning in today, listening to this and thinking, right, this all makes sense, but how do we approach it properly? What does good look like for you in practice? And by that, I'm thinking about where should they start and what separates a scalable approach from a one-off deployment that wouldn't deliver as much.
That's great. And I would go with, I want to say 4 points there. I'll try to keep it to 4. But start with that pain point that, as I mentioned before, you probably already know where that lies within your supply chain, something that can be actioned. And from those actions, you can actually see whether improvements were made or not. So, and I say start with one, but you probably have a whole list of those. That would be your step 1. Your step 2 would be prioritize all of those points. So you'll want to almost have a matrix of who has the ownership of that. So when something goes wrong, whose headache is it? Because you definitely will want to bring them on the journey with you to understand how that impacts the business, what value can provide, and also what actions can be taken when something is spotted and goes wrong. So having all of that mapped out, that gives you that prioritization. So really prioritize those use cases. That's step 2. So far I'm good. Step 3 is pick 1, 2, 3 cases and actually deploy them. Start putting them into practice. And as I mentioned, it could be one use case, multiple locations. It could be multiple use cases, one location. So really make sure you know what you're starting with and just start. To get value, even though I say the most value is derived from having the full chain covered, but to get, you have to start somewhere. So make sure that you know where you're going. And now I'll come to the 4th point, and that kind of ties into the one before. So whilst you're implementing those initial use cases or locations, whatever way that you decided to do it, make sure that you have that process in place to really get your best practices in implementing. Because for the 4th point, it's really going to be that scale. You don't want to just build a disjoint solution, as we said, because that gives you such limiting value. What you want to do is to provide that limited value to every place where it can deliver you more, because what that does is really give you that full end-to-end picture. So it's never just about one place. Make sure that you have a plan, even if it's a little rough sketch of how you're going to scale. Don't stop at that first use case, because although you may get value, chances are there's more to see within your chain.
Fantastic. You offered 4, you delivered 4, so well done. I think that last point on planning is really interesting. I've often heard you say that planning is everything, the plan is nothing. So that planning mindset is absolutely key. But what you took us through feels like a really grounded way to think about it. And that's starting with a visible operational pain, not with the technology in isolation. And then, if I heard you right, building with repeatability in mind. And it's about clear ownership, clear response, and a common foundation that makes it much easier to extend and layer on those adjacent use cases later on. Let's do our reality check, because this is often where the real difference shows up. Once you've got the visibility, What has to happen next, and how do teams turn detection into action? I think the question behind the question would be, what does good follow through actually look like in practice?
That's a great question. So we already touched a little bit upon scaling. So I think what that scaling really provides you is that operational intelligence. So really gaining value and making those improvements throughout your chain. When you just see one detection or even multiple detection, that gives you visibility, but that's not quite going that step further of true insight and intelligence. So I would say you need to gain insight into um, each of your use cases. Is there a pattern? This is where analytics comes in. And this is where, again, having that end to end solution with one vendor really helps because the data is going to be consistent. And that allows you to really analyze what's going on a lot better than if you have disjointed data and insights. You need to select use cases where you can actually make a difference and impact. So, what I mean by that is something that can be actionable. It's no use just saying, let's go with a safety example here that, oh, there is a blind corner here and the forklifts may or may not crash into each other. Uh, the point is to identify that issue and find a way that you can resolve it and really go after it. So you need the actionable insights once you figure out what the issues really are. Then post action, you need to verify whether what you've done actually made a difference. So this goes back to analytics again. You can set a threshold or baseline or new baseline to say, this is where we've added that action. Let's see if we have an improvement in efficiency or a decrease in safety risks or near misses. And lastly, really shift and pivot as needed. So just making one change may not is unlikely to give you a full 100% improvement. So keep your eye on those insights, keep your fingers on that pulse, and shift and pivot as you need. The other part of this is also supply chains are rarely just in one place at one time. So you can really have that difference between local and global view. So for the local view, that's going to be your one specific location or region or a part of the supply chain, say warehouse and logistics. So there's very different information that they will need to know versus, let's say, global leadership that needs to make sure that absolutely everything is to its top-notch efficiency. When it comes to local, you really want to make sure that they know where the fallovers may happen, maybe even a baseline comparison between them and the rest of the world or the rest of the operations, but also those actionable insights. Right at the beginning, I spoke about buffer zones, letting them know, hey, material will be needed in this area within 10 minutes. So it's those specific signals that they can act on straight away. And when it comes to global view, it's going to be more of a trend analysis. How's each location doing one by one? They don't necessarily need to know those, granular actions of you need to get this material delivered within 10 minutes because they won't be close enough or near enough or have enough brain power to deal with every single location, every single point. They're not going to be calling up Jeff, the head of warehouse one, to say, oh my God, do you have the material in the right place? For them, it's seeing patterns, understanding, is there one location that seems to be falling behind the others? Or is there one area? So for example, buffer zones, do we always in multiple locations have issues there? So it's really looking for something that can provide you both those local insights, because that's where it's going to make the difference. That's where the people can make the impact, but also have that global view because that allows the leadership to pinpoint where more resources are needed or where things are going wrong and a bit more attention is needed. So that's definitely the most important, not the most important, but that's certainly a great way of looking at it. And to tie all of this back again is going back to that point of detecting something is great, but it's just a little drop in the ocean, right? If you really want to have those true ripples throughout, I would certainly recommend going with multiple use cases across all your sites. And that's really what provides that operational intelligence, allowing you to improve and really shift the mindset within the organization.
That is such an eloquent and wonderful answer. Thank you. Um, just pulling a thread through that, you're talking about actionable insights. You're then talking about the impact of those, and then moving through into intelligence. And I think that's the key distinction, really. Visibility alone is not the goal. The goal is about giving teams operational intelligence they can actually use, or what I like to think as visual intelligence. And it's that visual intelligence that streamlines operations and streamlines the value chain and the supply chain. That's where structured workflows and dashboards matter so much, because they connect detection to ownership, corrective action, and then to longer term improvement rather than just one-off alerts, exactly as you said here. Right, Sasha, let's move into a few audience questions, because these are exactly the kinds of questions we hear from operations and supply teams quite often. One of the first I'm seeing here is about prioritization, and it's simply, how do you decide where to start? And for me, I'd just add into that, what should they look for first? And perhaps how do they avoid trying to tackle everything at once?
So it's about listing out, or maybe within your organization, trying to understand what questions are in everyone's mind, what they think might be useful to get that insight into. Once you have the list of those use cases, you can prioritize them by business impact, actionable insights, so something that you can action once you've had that insight, and then also what full organizational impact that I suppose that's business impact, but also what value does that bring to the organization if that one linchpin pivot point gets solved or got an insight into? So I think listing out those use cases first. We also, little plug on Viso AI website, you can also find materials on helping you prioritize those use cases, really helpful to gain those insights. But once you have the list, you then really need to figure out what can go first. At Viso, we also do a matrix of business value versus technical feasibility. So you don't want to start with something that happens once in a blue moon. So, for example, let's say fall detection because someone has a heart attack, right? That might happen, and it's awful if it does, but that may happen once every 5 or 10 years at most. So, putting in computer vision to detect something that may happen once every 5 years isn't the most valuable way of deploying a use case. What you really want to see is something that will show you results more or less consistently. So, for example, if you're looking at production flow, if you know that the issues once every 2 weeks, every month, then that may be a good starting point, because issues in production flow really delays the full production, the full end-to-end supply chain operation, but also wastes a lot of material, wastes a lot of man hours. So that could be somewhere to start looking at first. But really, you know your organization best. We can certainly make suggestions. You can certainly use our tools to help you understand where that value may lie. But within your organization, that's something that you will need to get together and understand what priorities for you look like.
That makes perfect sense. Having that consensus-based view on prioritization, because it's not really about starting where the tech looks most interesting. It's actually about starting, as you said, where the operational case is clearest and brings the greatest value. Okay, on to the next one. I can see there's one here about hidden cost. Um, so, which part of the chain tends to create the most unseen cost? And another one that's similar, where do teams most often underestimate the drag?
I think this is something that you've mentioned. It tends to be with the handoff points, right? So we tend to have good visibility within our own realm of responsibility, but it's those points of handing over, for example, material to the logistics team for them to take it to its next place. It tends to just involve disputes, it tends to involve lack of visibility. So, one of the examples that comes top of mind, for example, is when goods arrive damaged to the endpoint, be that to the customer or the store that will sell them, who gets the blame? It's easy for me as a consumer to say, hey, I received this piece of furniture and it was damaged. You solve it. But what, of course, happens in the background that most people in this call will have a very good idea of, it gets into finger pointing of this was definitely good enough when it left our production floor, our warehouse. Logistics must have messed it up. And logistics will say, no, we have the perfect setup. This would never happen with us. So, and that finger pointing can break down relationships. It, of course, gets sometimes transition may or logistics may incur cost when it wasn't on them, and vice versa. Having that full accountability, for example, when something leaves the warehouse, that takes a snapshot and tells the workers, this is damaged, you will get flack for this. And the same with the logistics to have the visibility inside their operation of how materials are coming in and leaving their facilities and their vehicles also provides that valuable insight. It no longer becomes about finger pointing, but really identifying, pinpointing where those issues arise. So there is no set answer for everyone on this call. It will always be something that does require further look into. And I would definitely keep an eye on those transition handoff points because sometimes it can be a bit of a no person land. So the responsibility can be a little vague. But I would certainly assess those points and if it's viable to have a point there for monitoring.
Yes, I think that's really, really clear. And what's coming through for me is around that point on blind spots and handoffs. It's one of the biggest themes running through today's conversation, that the hidden cost is often sitting in the in between spaces rather than the obvious ones. Let's take one more final audience question. Let's see what we've got here. One we often cover around scaling. Once one use case is working, which metrics matter most? What would you say to that, Sasha?
That's a great question. So I think one of the most important aspects of this is there an actionable insight that can be gained from this. So, were we able to not just identify, oh, there's a problem, but also maybe do something, change something to reduce the impact of the problem or reduce the frequency of it? So, really looking for a use case where a difference can be made. So, if I go back and have a look at that case that we were speaking about before of the pallet or a good leaving a warehouse and arriving to the customer doorstep or shop damaged. The actionable insight could be, where is the damage coming from? It could be, maybe there's forklift mishandling on our side, maybe there is placement issues within the truck itself. Maybe it is the way that things get taken off the truck and delivered to wherever it is they're going. So as long as it's not just, oh yeah, the goods are still arriving damaged, not great, but it's pinpointing potential areas where that damage happened, and, for example, provide additional training to your forklift staff to really make sure that the way they handle the goods is more appropriate to the material that they have there, so it doesn't get damaged, so your costs of loss really get reduced. I would always say, look for that actionable insights and look at how those actions impact the issue at hand. You really want to see those numbers of inefficiencies going down or efficiencies going up.
That is a lovely way to bring it all together in terms of metrics. I think what rings true and clear through all of that is this isn't about a series of disconnected deployments. It's actually about building visibility across the value chain in a way that improves local execution and then strengthens wider supply chain performance at the same time. Okay, so as we close, there are a few things worth leaving you with. My key summary to start with is, first, AI vision is most powerful when it's framed as operational visibility across the movement of goods, not just a single isolated use case. Second, from everything that Sasha said, I think some of the strongest gains come at the handoff points where better visibility improves flow, safety, and decision making across inbound logistics. And that's also across yard operations, warehouse flow, production interfaces, dispatch, the list goes on. Third, I would say one strong use case can absolutely become the foundation for connected wins in adjacent workflows. That's where layering becomes strategically so important, not as more technology for its own sake, but as a more effective operational model. And then finally, if I was to bring it all home, visibility only creates value when it leads to action. And that's where Sasha was fantastic talking about that meaningful insight and actionable output. So, dashboards, incident workflows, structured case management are what help turn visibility into corrective action and sustained improvement. If you'd like to explore this further, we'd encourage you to look at the resources page at viso.ai. There's practical planning tools available, including our use case builder that Sasha referred to, an ROI calculator, readiness checklist, and a deployment roadmap. Those can help you identify where value is strongest, assess where your organization is most ready to begin, and map out a realistic path from early use cases to broader deployment. Sasha, I just want to say a massive thank you. It's great having you here. It's clear you speak with so much passion and knowledge. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Always enjoy having a little bit of a powwow with you, Jeremy, and hopefully bring some insights to everyone on the call. And thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
And as ever, everyone out there tuning in, stay safe, stay well, and stay tuned for more updates and insights in our follow-up after this webinar. See you next time.